You're listening to EdTech Heroes, a podcast that looks at how teachers in today's classrooms can use technology to improve student learning. In each episode, a hero in the world of education will share their story and discuss how innovation can influence the minds of the next generation. Let's jump in.
Hey y'all, and welcome to EdTech Heroes. I'm your host, Nef, and today I am excited to welcome an OG in the EdTech world, Alice Keeler. Alice is a high school math teacher, but that's not it. She's also a Google certified innovator, a Microsoft innovative educator, a Google Cloud Innovator Champion, a Google developer expert, founder of Coffee EDU, and the prolific author on her own website, Teacher Tech with Alice Keeler. Alice, welcome to EdTech Heroes.
Oh, thanks, Nap. Great to see you again.
Yeah, we have known each other for a number of years now, which is pretty cool to now have you on the podcast.
Excited. Thanks for asking me.
Yeah, so obviously that was quite a mouthful of an intro, right? Like you're not necessarily dedicated to a particular company or a particular professional development adventure. You have done it all over the years. But you have earned yourself the title of the Queen of Spreadsheets. What is that all about?
I love spreadsheets. I like to say that the answer is always a spreadsheet. I have stickers that say that the answer is always a spreadsheet. I'm really passionate about data. I think the right data helps us to connect better with students. That data itself is not a 4-letter word. That old data is a 4-letter word. And then we can really control and manipulate our information. We can do our jobs faster and better. And so I'm really passionate about sharing spreadsheets with people, how easy they are to use, and really a solution to a lot of problems. But more than that, I'm just really passionate about students and how we can interact better with them.
Yeah, that's interesting that spreadsheets in and of themselves are kind of this bridge between unorganized information and actionable data that actually makes you better at your job as a teacher. And I think that that is also interesting that you have that insight, because one of the things that I really like that you've said is that no amount of technology can replace a great teacher. And I think for lots of teachers, especially those who are new to technology, that's a legitimate concern that technology is going to replace them in the classroom, is going to make them less effective, maybe is going to come at the expense of relationships that they've spent so much time trying to build. But can you tell me a little bit, like, what is this relationship like between an amazing teacher and good technology look like?
Yeah, well, I think what you just said is not completely unfounded. Even I've been in a situation where I'm a math teacher, I have a degree in math, and I've taught math classes where I was basically just asked to be an in-room babysitter. They're on a computerized program. The kids take some sort of math test of math problems they could not possibly care about. It shows them some wheel of you're good at this, you're not good at this, and then they're supposed to eat each of the little pie wedges through a digital worksheet of soul-sucking proportions for them to improve. And if the kids don't want to, I suppose I'm supposed to come by with a cattle prod and like push the buttons, keep going. At best, I'm regulated to being a tutor. And I never find that to be very satisfying as a job. I mean, teaching is really a creative endeavor. And when we take creativity out of education, that's when we enjoy our jobs less. You want to know why teachers are leaving in droves? There's a lot of reasons. That's a long list. But really, one of them is we've sucked the fun out of teaching in the sense that we used to have autonomy over our class, that we recognize that a student is struggling. And back to my point with the spreadsheets and data, I can observe with my eyes and the relationships that I build with a student. I can see that they're sitting there struggling, even if I'm in a remote situation. But having that data on top of it really supports and helps me know this is not working. And the problem with having a computerized system that is independent of a highly qualified teacher is it's not personalized. This drives me crazy. The next person to say personalized learning to me is just going to get it. Is it personalized? Is there anything about that program that has to do with that student and what they're interested in, or is it just self-paced? And I'm really sensitive about this self-paced stuff. I think there is some room to utilize things like this in conjunction with a highly qualified teacher, and I'll explain that in a minute. But to say we're going to be able to replace because the students can just go at their own pace, it's personalized. But the truth is, when it's not working for them, you can't differentiate. When there's a glitch in the system or it's just got a weird way of responding, I have a lot of people with whatever dumb math program has been assigned to them a lot of times for college classes. And it is so frustrating for me because I know how the answer is supposed to be written. It's supposed to be in curly braces or small or large. And it marks me wrong, not because I'm not correct, but because I have an equivalent expression. And believe me, you just want to pick up the whole thing and throw it at the wall. It's not the beauty of mathematics. It is boiling education down to its worst elements of just competing with a calculator or competing with Wikipedia or a Google search. And that's not education. Education comes from making connections to your learning, to feeling that you can make a difference with it, you can apply it and use it somewhere. And that doesn't come from a robot, and that's not going to happen anytime soon. You need a highly qualified person that knows that student and what adjustments they can make. So I had a student this last year, she wanted to do art. We were in geometry class. So she wanted to apply some of her art. I said, no problem. Here is some instructions on doing perspective drawings, but I want to see your drawing of perspective that's in the style of your art. And she spent so much time investigating and researching and looking up this style and then how to apply it to her art. And where before, honestly, she wasn't doing very much. We all have students in our class who have challenging home lives and trying to figure out how to make connections with them around, like, again, teach math, around math, when they really truly have bigger things going on in their lives. That's an art form of relationship building. I care about you. I know what you're into. I know when to back off. I know when I can push you a little bit. And so one of my biggest fears as we come into this new school year is that many schools cannot find teachers. At my school over here, there's 3 positions that are just not filled for math, not to mention the other ones. So what choice are they going to have? And so I hope that what we can do is we can come up with some solutions that really are more creative to allow every student to have someone who really cares about them and is able to use and leverage technology to treat each kid as an individual rather than a progress bar.
Yeah, certainly. I'm really glad you said that. Prior to my first year teaching, and probably every teacher listening to this has seen that awesome TED Talk by former principal Rita Pearson, Every Kid Needs a Champion. And I think it's maybe like 7 or 8 minutes long, but you finish it and you're like, dang, I get it. Like, you cannot learn from somebody that you don't have an authentic connection and relationship to. And I think when we think of technology as this force multiplier that allows teachers to build more relationships with more kids, then it's magical, right? If it divorces the teacher from that authentic connection, then it's destructive and it never is going to do what it is intended to do.
Yeah.
But we're having this real conversation right now that I don't want to shy away from in terms of thinking about personalized learning versus self-paced learning. And you're right. Every time I turn around, everybody and their mother is talking about this idea of personalized learning. But I'm curious from you, like, what actually counts as personalized learning?
Well, I would define it as, and I don't know that I would be agreed with all of the time, but that personalized learning has some element of personalization. The student has choice, that there's a teacher or someone who's able to make adjustments to the pace and what is assigned, to swap some things out perhaps, or to say, you know what, I'm giving you credit for this. I was able to give you an alternative assessment. That's something we do as teachers. They didn't do well on a paper test, so I sit down and have a conversation with them. Maybe they can talk me through it. Maybe they can do a project. But a personalized learning system should have student input. It should have student interests integrated into it, and it should have the ability to be flexible.
Yeah, So, is it fair to say then, according to Alice Keeler, that in order for something to be personalized truly, it can't be static, right? Like, I couldn't adopt a personalized learning curriculum today before I actually met the kids that I'm going to teach in 2022, 2023.
Fair enough to say, exactly. Just in general, to say, whatever I did last year was not for the kids that I'm teaching this year. So anything that I'm doing that can somehow be written out in advance doesn't teach kids, it teaches curriculum.
I'm with you there. Let's dive into that a little bit, right? Because I think that there have been lots of conversations happening around allowing teachers to work smarter, not harder. So, thinking through what lessons they've done previously that have been effective that they might be able to redeploy. And I don't think you're saying that that is bad practice. I think you're saying that we have to take a step beyond that. So, like, what is the bright line there? Like, how do I make sure that I can use what has been effective while also being responsive to how these kids are different from last year's kids?
What a great way to put it. We're just going to put it full circle here, right? We're going to come back to spreadsheets and data and being reflective and being willing to do something different. How do I cram this down their throats a different way? It's probably not the right response to it, is rather maybe I need to do something completely different. I think those of us who are good teachers just do that, right? We reflected on it last year. I don't just reuse it this year, but having the data to know that it really did or didn't work is going to me take it to that next level, that I have some level of support to look at, okay, these are what my students engaged in. This is the students who are successful. These are the students who are not successful. And everyone has a different reason for not being successful. So do I repackage the whole lesson again for everybody to do the same thing? Or do I think about, okay, some students were successful at this, so let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's also provide some options and choices so I can help all students to be successful. And then I'm looking at the current data. If students aren't being successful at something, do I just write down a score and like, well, I hope to do better next time? Or do we really think, how could I adjust and modify something to bring those students up?
Yeah, for sure. That makes a lot of sense. And I'm going to throw one more thing in here while we're having this conversation. How do we also remain responsive to the culture of the school? And I'm asking you this because you've been teaching for a number of years. I know you taught in California, now you're down in Kansas. I'm going to imagine that the children that you interact with are different on lots of different levels. The analogies that resonate with them, the jokes they find funny, lots of things make those kids different, right? So, how do we both think about data, think about the kids in front of us, and maybe also think about how we are responsive to the culture of the school building and the culture of the surrounding area? Because those are two different things, right?
I just love everything you said so much. It all stands alone. I mean, just the fact that you'd want to think and reflect on those things is really the answer to your question. Is asking the right reflection questions to say, how does this impact my instruction? How do I change what I do based on the conversations I've had with parents, based on the conversations I've had with administrators that I'm out in the community? I want to make a point that I go to my students' sporting events, that I go to the street fair or different things, that I share some of these experiences. So here in Kansas, what we had this last week is the county fair. Now, where I'm at right now is really small, but a lot of my students had an animal that they were showing. So now what I'm thinking is I come back is how can I take the experience of raising a cow and putting it out so that you can sell it. One of my students, last year, her cow didn't make weight. And so she lost all of her money that she invested into raising this cow because she wasn't able to sell it at the fair. This year, her cow did raise weight. It made weight. You can tell I raise cows. No, we don't. I make spread. But, when she was in my class this last year, I knew that's what she was working on. So actually, one of the projects that I had for her was to design a spreadsheet around seeing how she could make sure that her cow makes weight. And she was really into designing that, getting them in there. I was able to give her feedback. A lot of times, this is one of my tougher students. She doesn't ever want to listen to me. School is stupid, whatever. But when I gave them an option to create an assignment to create, was they got to choose their own way to apply the Pythagorean theorem. So she was building cattle chutes. And again, with the raising the cow and being able to just put in all of her expenses and really think about how is she able to sell and make money at that. That's an assignment I wouldn't have done when I lived in the inner city of Fresno for obvious reasons. And so when I was in the inner city of Fresno, I talked with my kids about when the bus just drives by and you're standing there and you and your parents get to work. The bus system, if they were running behind or if they were full, they would just skip the bus stop. And so for people who didn't have a car, this was really a problem. So identifying what's going on in the community and how you bring those conversations back, I found time and time again, is the secret sauce, right?
Yeah, 100%. I'm like literally laughing as you're telling that story because I'm imagining talking about cow shoots to the kids I taught on the south side of Chicago. It just doesn't make sense. But you're right. You understand what they care about and then infuse that into the curriculum that you have. So you're teaching the standard, but you're teaching it in a way that is actually going to make them care about it.
That is the art of teaching. Teaching is not standing in front of students and talking. You nailed it right there.
Yeah, 100%. It's like knowing your audience
Mhm.
and creating something that is unique for that audience. I want to take a step back, right? Because if I remember correctly, you've only been in Kansas for like the last 2 or 3 years or something. And I'm sure there are folks who are preparing for a new school year.
Mhm.
Either this is their first year teaching and they're brand new to it, or maybe they're about to switch communities as well. What could they be doing in this last couple of weeks right before school starts in order to understand how they can be most effective on day one? And I think you alluded to that a little bit, but like if you could give us a straight checklist of things they could be doing, that would be awesome.
If you're able to get a hold of a list of students and parents who are in your class, call them. Depending on your community, I have gone and knocked on their doors, like meet people. What are your concerns? Tell me about the community, things that you guys are excited about. Where do you go to vacation? Uh, what's your perspective of the school? Tell me about your kid. I mean, you don't have to call everybody, but who are you having conversations with? As you rightfully pointed out, is knowing that the community and what kind of things resonate isn't going to happen because you researched the town on the internet. Start with having a conversation with the principal. Definitely interview some of the other teachers, but getting out and talking to your stakeholders about who they are, what they value, what's important to them, what are their goals, and at least can't do everything. You cannot do everything. Let's set one goal, right? I know many of my students are in 4-H and do things in the county fair. So how could I make that part of some of the things that I incorporate throughout the year? I don't have to include everything and I don't have to know everything. I moved here, there are these giant grain elevators. I didn't think they were still a thing. Like I didn't know it is. Like they're active. The farmers bring their corn out to these huge grain elevators. There are like 3 of them in town, which is crazy because it's such a small town. And I didn't incorporate that in my first year. It's still like what? But the biology teacher took me out on a tractor in her sister's field, and I got to see the whole process for how they get the corn and get it to the grain elevator. And then I was able to have those conversations and share that experience. So I just would not undervalue getting out of your house. In fact, don't worry as much about doing the curriculum as much as making those connections around your community and having those stories. Who do you know in this community that other people know? I can reference Bob Dale. He's the guy on the radio, and giving me some things that really connect and resonate is going to make a lot more difference than whether or not you know everything in the pacing guide.
Yeah, certainly. Those things are so cool, right? When you can think about these collective experiences in a community. And for me, sometimes it was going to the football game. Our school rallied around our football team, right? And it feels so inconsequential, but just being there and then being able to talk about a play or a bad call by the ref. And I'm going to put myself out there. I'm an adult, but refs make bad calls, and I sometimes talk to my high school students about it. So all of that is so important. So beyond getting to know the community, with which I'm with you there, that is probably 80% of what you can do to be an effective educator going into the school year. What are some of the smaller things that you can do as well to prepare yourself, maybe to infuse technology or things of that nature?
I don't know that it's smaller, and I don't know I can put a 80% on it, because there's obviously a lot of elements to this puzzle, and that is a piece that you should pay attention to and maybe start with. But then who's your PLN? Who are you getting emotional support from? I was talking with a friend today, and he said being a teacher made him such a better communicator because, now here's the kicker, teaching was so isolating. And so from that experience, he actually got the opposite lesson out of that, is how important it is for him in his job. He's no longer teaching, but to really value relationships that you have with people. And he said this to me just like an hour ago. And that really resonated with me. I remember my first advice when I started teaching was, Alice, just smile and nod, and then turn around, shut your door, and do whatever you want. And then when you feel isolated, when you feel like you have to make all the lesson plans yourself, when you're frustrated and you don't have a strong support group, you're not going to last. So equally important is, who are the people that support you? Who, when you're having a bad day, will have a glass of wine with you, or at least a hug? Who's sharing some lesson plans with you? And what's really great about 2022 is you don't have to have people that live near you. I've moved to the middle of nowhere, Kansas, and I don't feel like I'm any less connected than I was when I lived in a town of 500,000 people. Between text message, Google Meet, Zoom, email, just collaborative documents, ways that you can share information. If you are lesson planning by yourself, you are doing it wrong. You are not the only algebra teacher. You're not the only third grade teacher. There's obviously a whole bunch of other people who are doing what you're doing. They might not be people at your school. Sometimes they are not on the same page as you pedagogically, or you don't have people that you can collaborate with. For example, at my school, there's one geometry teacher, there's one algebra teacher. We don't have somebody that you can really work with around that. So there are lots of ways to connect. Just Facebook. Facebook's probably your best way to do that. There's so many teachers and teacher groups. Whatever you're teaching, there is a Facebook teacher group around that. Two things: join and interact and share. Whatever it's going to come back to you 10 times over. If you've ever seen the Dan Meyer ADE video, where he says he's been for years giving out his curriculum and his lessons for free, and the return on free is immeasurable. I can say the same exact thing. I give away my stuff for free. I want to share it. When you share, I all the time have people say, hey, Alice, I just really appreciated that you shared all of these things, and I made this and I wanted to share it with you. The teaching community is so generous. So just don't limit yourself, but definitely to location. But find yourself a solid group of people that you get together and meet regularly, and that you share, divide, and conquer, and commiserate together. There are great parts about teaching, and then other times that you need a hug, right? And that's probably true about a lot of professions. But having a support system, you're not going to make it if you don't have that. And the other thing I would say on my checklist is pick work hours and stick to it. Teaching can take 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and all your holidays if you let it. But my husband's an English teacher. He does not bring work home ever. He doesn't lesson plan at home. He doesn't grade at home. We're at home. We have 5 kids. We spend time with our kids. No one needs you to burn out, and you don't need to burn out. If you're good about having a team and you say, look, I'm going to work from 7:30 in the morning till 4:30 or whatever your hours are, just decide it. Just decide. Now, here's my piece of advice to you. If you make exceptions, then you don't have work hours. And then it just continues to spill out into your personal life Parkinson's law says a task will take as long as you give it, right? So if you have 3 hours to complete the task, it'll take 3 hours. If you've got 3 weeks to complete the task, it'll take 3 weeks. So if you restrict your work hours, say like, I'm only working these, I'm not working on Sundays, and I'm only going to do a couple hours on Saturday. The only exceptions being like I have to be there for back to school, right? That might be outside of the hours that you set. So besides contractual obligations, stick to it. You'll be surprised how productive you can be when you say like, nope, I cannot work outside of these hours. I'm going to collaborate, get resources from others, and I'm going to really focus on listening to my students and making adaptations. That's going to be a key to having a successful year.
I love both of those tips. I particularly love the idea of folks setting some hours and sticking to it. I think we've had a collective conversation over the last few years and really over the last few decades around how unsustainable teaching can be for lots of folks. I want to talk a little bit about finding a tribe. And I actually attribute my first couple of years to having a tribe of amazing ladies here in Miami who helped quite a bit. And even in the 7 years, I think it's been since I first entered the classroom, the idea of finding this tribe online is a relatively new one and such a dope one because you, to your point, are not relegated to something. But one of the pitfalls that I hear from some educators is that they join a Facebook group and immediately they have 50 different suggestions and 150 different tech tools that folks have recommended. And it's hard to think about what they're going to prioritize, what they're going to do. So what's your advice there, right? In terms of understanding all of this input and then being able to decide what you do and what you don't, specifically around technology.
Technology isn't going to make you a better teacher. It's not, trying to do 50,000 tech tools. And if the solution to your problem is that you need another tech tool, that's probably not the right solution. So I recommend that you buddy up. When we talk about you have your PLN, you have your group of close people that you interact with, that's not your Facebook group. Your Facebook group is a good place to find some of those people and then invite them to have a personal conversation. So a Facebook group is great because I love just seeing the resources people are sharing, the suggestions, and totally when you put something on there, it's either off topic, overwhelming. It's not things that you even have access to. And then you're just really not sure where to go with. So that's where we're coming back to the buddy system. You're like, hey, I got one solid person that I make a point of meeting with regularly and say, these are the things that I saw. And we talk through it and you make a decision. Really, you need 3 tech tools. You need to learn and focus on 3 things and then asking the right questions about how you use them is the key. Now, before you add on another one, make sure that you have exhausted those in any way that can do these questions. How do I interact with my students? How do I get feedback to and from them? How do the students collaborate? How do they get to be creative? What decisions do students get to make? Really looking at the 4 C's and thinking about how you do feedback and interactions. That's the question. So whatever your tool is, say you're using Nearpod. Does Nearpod allow students to make decisions? Yes. Does it allow me to get some information from students so that I can make some modifications? Yes. Does it have some ways that it can take some things off my plate? Grading. I love auto graded so long as there's a teacher who can make modifications that the kids are not like, it glitched, it didn't work, it's not working for that kid for whatever reason, I can give them something else, right? So I'm actually for that because then I can trade my time to sit with a kid and work with them individually. Does it allow for feedback, for a feedback loop, for them to make corrections, for me to get information that helps me to adjust and modify my curriculum? Well, that's one tool that does a lot of things. I don't need to go find 20,000 tools. Like, use this one well. Like, what is your goal? What are you trying to do? Out of the 3 tools that you have, can it not be done with those? Okay. Let's not worry about that right now. Are you good at those 3 tools? Do you feel comfortable with them? Don't bring on something else that's just going to overwhelm you if you're not ready for it. And so, I'm going to use my LMS, be it Google Classroom, Canvas, Schoology, whatever. I'm going to really figure out how that allows me to interact with students and do feedback. I'm going to do that as a focus. I'm going to put the kid's name in there as often as I can. That's what I love about Screencastify. In fact, I literally added this line to my book that I'm writing right now this week, is the power of using Screencastify to say a kid's name. Nef, I love what you've got going on here. Nef, you've got a great title sentence. Nef, now we just need to build this out into a full essay. How are we going to get 3 supporting paragraphs? So Nef, I want you to think about these 3 supporting paragraphs. And I really try to take it to the point of hyperbole. Is how can I type their name multiple times? How can I say their name multiple times? Or whatever tool that I'm using, because it feels personal, that it's relationship building. And when you hear and see your name, you lean into it. So it truly improves learning by using tools where you think of how to really make it personal. Personal comment, personal feedback note. It's so much easier to do feedback when you record it. You can record it as an audio note. You can record it as a video note, and you leave it there. I'm looking at their work, record that feedback, and send it back to them. I've saved time. It's much faster, and they get a higher quality feedback, right? So I know that Canvas has a recording tool built into it. Otherwise, I use Screencastify personally is what I use. There's lots of things built into your system that it's designed for feedback. Focus on that. How can I do better feedback? How can I personalize the feedback? How can I give them specific, this is what you did well, specifically what you can improve on? Good feedback is not good job. Good feedback is specifically what they did well on, specifically an actionable item that they can improve. And then, okay, so I'm going to use Google Classroom, I'm going to use Canvas, Schoology, one of these, obviously. You're probably going to use either Google Docs or Microsoft Office, right? So make sure that you're sharing either of these products, that you know how to give and return, and not in the old 1990s way. Both Google and Microsoft are collaborative tools. So look at them from a collaboration point of view. That's what I'm saying. Like, really learn that tool really well and how it can help you to interact better before you just think, I just need a different tool. Microsoft Teams,
Yeah.
amazing things in there that allows you to have interactions with students, but it has a lot. So investing in just whatever those tools are. And then my third suggestion for a tool would be something that does some level of self-grading. Could be Google Forms, it could be quizzes, anything that helps take some of that off your plate for lower critical thinking questions. And the most important reason in my mind to use tools like this is the data that it gives you to tell you what is and isn't working, so you can come back and modify what you're doing.
For sure. For sure. I like that because I think it invites us as educators to read the suggestions or listen to the suggestions or however they're coming in, hear what they are, but then also get down to them at their most essential, right? Maybe somebody is telling you, hey, use Microsoft Teams to do Y. And you're like, dang, I want to do Y, but if I just modify this a little bit, I can actually do the same thing in Google Docs. And the thing is, I know Google Docs. That's what I have access to. And that's no shade to Microsoft Teams. It might be the opposite, right? Somebody is saying, let's do it in Google Docs. And you're like, actually, I know Teams. But I think when we think about the idea and then we run it through the lens of what technology we know, what technology we have access to, and then also bringing it full circle, running it through the lens of the kids that we teach, then it makes it a little bit easier to be able to prioritize what's going to work for us and what might be a dud in the water. Like, keep scrolling. That's not the right thing for me.
Right.
So we've been talking about lots of good things, and I love that you talk about these tools that have some degree of ubiquity. And I think Screencastify is a part of that. It's not the only tool that has some degree of ubiquity, but I do think looking for tools like that is so important and helps you sort of wade through the water. I want to take a
Rare
step.
that I don't suggest Screencastify when I'm trying to help some teacher with a solution. It solves so many problems.
I like it. And I just want to throw out there that we did not tell Alice that she had to say that.
No one
Um,
paid.
so yeah, we don't pay people to be on this podcast. Who would have thought? But yeah, we appreciate the shout out. So outside of technology, I want to ask what I think is a super important question as part of our Heroes segment, where we ask everybody who is on the show a really, really inspiring tip for our listeners. We've got a couple of weeks left until school is in full force. And I think for folks who are listening who have been teaching for a number of years, we know that sometimes the school year can be like a freight train, and once it starts, it is just absolutely crazy. So, what would you recommend folks do during this time, not to prepare for the year, but to make sure that they are mentally fresh? What are your best tips to like go in as best you can?
Just finding those people who energize you. Who are the people who are not complaining about teaching, but are solution driven that you can come back to later. So finding somebody who is your buddy, who's there to help you to not burn out, to not feel overwhelmed, rather than, I have some friends that are really awesome, but when you ask them something, I'm more overwhelmed than when I talk to you. They've got 10,000 suggestions. So who is it that's telling you, you need to put your work away? You worked enough today. Who helped you to set those work hours? And that doesn't have to be a teacher. Who's helping you to keep that accountability that you do have a life outside of teaching? And it's not only okay, it's totally okay. And it's a requirement. You can't be your best teacher. You can't be rested if you don't set boundaries. And you're going to need someone to help you because teaching just keeps sucking you in that you're never done.
I'm so glad you said that that person doesn't have to be a teacher, because that's what I'm thinking, right? That sometimes that person might be even more equipped to be your buddy if they are not a teacher, and they can kind of just have real talk with you and say, hey, in this moment, we're going to drink mimosas and we're going to stare at the sky. That is the activity.
Yep.
And then there are going to be other moments where you are really deeply involved in your work, and that balance is exactly what makes you a really good educator.
Yeah.
All right. Final question, other than your own domain, which is alicekeeler.com, which if you have not been there, has some amazing tips, literally years worth of posts from Alice.
Yeah.
What are some of your other favorite online resources to share with teachers?
Well, a thing that I've been really into this last year is Schoollytics.com. That is SCHOOLLYTICS. It's school and analytics together. A good chunk of the stuff that's on that site are directly ideas that I had of ways that I like to interact with students and provide feedback. So that's one of my favorites. And quizzes, QUIZIZZ.com is another one of my favorites. It allows me to, with the pro account, and I hate recommending things that are paid, but I think it's worth it for you to get your principal to pay for it for you, is allows you to get a question bank. And so I assign 3 questions out of all the questions. So instead of every student needing to do 30 problems, I ask them to get 100% with 3 questions. So it allows me to differentiate. It allows me to take things off of my plate so I can spend my time working with students personally, where they have something individual to do. So find something like that.
I love it. And I also love the tip to ask your principal to pay. As a new teacher, I didn't even know that was a thing, that was a concept. I was just throwing money out for everybody who asked for it. So worst thing they can do is say no, but absolutely have that conversation with your principal, your dean, somebody who might be able to either reimburse you or pay for it upfront. So that in and of itself is a tip.
I find really good success on when you ask. Don't just say, hey, I want this tool. You say, this is how I'm going to use it. This is how I'm going to use it with my students. These are my specific ideas. And this is my plan that I'm going to use it all year long. Not just you're going to pay for it and then I'm not going to get any use out of it. And make sure at the end of the year, you report back, look at how much value I got out of this thing that you got me. Now I also want this other thing.
I like that. That's an extra tip, right? That you are showing yourself to be a conscious consumer. And I think the other thing there is that it also paves the way for other educators who want to have similar conversations with your principal. They say, okay, I kind of took a leap with Alice and that worked out. So when Jenny comes or when John comes and they want to buy either the same tool and maybe we can get on a team plan, or they want to buy something different, then that principal is willing to have that conversation, not just about technology, but about anything.
Yep, agreed. I find really good success that I'm very transparent with what I'm doing and I say this worked and this didn't work. And I'm honest either way. I don't try to make it seem like everything's awesome all the time in my classroom. And then it really makes for a lot easier conversations when I do ask for those resources because they know I'm using it, they know how I'm using it, and I'm being reflective about it.
Love it. Reflection is the key.
It is.
All right, Alice, thank you so much for joining EdTech Heroes. If you're listening to this, make sure you follow Alice on Twitter. She is at Alice Keeler. Keeler is spelled Keeler. She has tons of great EdTech tips there and, of course, on her website. I am your host, Nef, and I am looking forward to seeing each of you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of EdTech Heroes, presented by Screencastify.